The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Al of the Hegemony rose from his crystalline seat. His four eyes swept across the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds, each species more alien than the last. The weight of his announcement pressed down on the chamber like a dying star. Fellow beings of the galaxy, his voice resonated through the universal translators, carrying undertones that spoke of grief and bewilderment. It has been confirmed. The third planet of the Sol system has vanished. A ripple of confusion spread through the vast chamber. The delegate, her tentacles writhing in distress, was the first to speak. Vanished? Surely you mean destroyed? Stars can go nova, planets can be shattered by. No, Al's interruption cut through her words like a plasma blade. Not destroyed, vanished, gone, as if it never existed. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives from the far reaches of the galaxy began chattering in hundreds of languages, their translators struggling to keep pace. The humans had been a curiosity, nothing more. A young species that had barely crawled beyond their own solar system, primitive by galactic standards. They had made first contact only 50 years ago, and even then they were considered little more than an amusing footnote in the grand tapestry of galactic civilization. Yet something about their disappearance sent chills through even the most ancient of races. Commander of the Space Navy stood in the observation deck of his flagship, staring at the empty void where Earth should have been. His species had been exploring space for over 10,000 years, and in all that time he had never witnessed anything like this. Planets didn't just disappear. They could be destroyed, certainly. They could be consumed by their stars or torn apart by gravitational forces. But to simply cease to exist, leaving no trace, no debris, no radiation signature, it was impossible. Sir, his science officer, a being whose name translated roughly to thoughtful wind through crystals, approached with data pad in hand. We've completed our 15th scan of the area. There are no quantum signatures, no dimensional disturbances, no evidence of any known weapon or phenomenon that could account for this. His mandibles clicked in frustration. What about the other planets in the system? Any changes? Mars remains unchanged. Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, all exactly as they were during our last survey. It's as if someone reached into the system and plucked Earth away like a fruit from a tree, leaving everything else undisturbed. The commander turned away from the viewport, his mind racing. The humans had been interesting, he had to admit. Unlike most species that achieved space travel, they hadn't unified their planet before reaching for the stars. They came to the galactic community as a fractured species, still waging wars among themselves, still struggling with concepts that most civilizations had resolved before achieving interstellar travel. Yet there had been something compelling about them. Their art, their literature, their music, it all spoke of a species with tremendous potential. They had a phrase that had amused many in the galactic community. Humanity, F yeah. It had become something of a joke among the more established races. The humans' naive enthusiasm and their tendency to refuse to accept limitations had been endearing in its own way. Now they were gone, and the joke felt hollow. Light years away, in the sprawling metropolis of Nu, capital of the Galactic Trade Federation, emergency sessions were being called. President, a being whose species had given up physical forms centuries ago and now existed as pure energy contained within crystalline matrices, found himself facing the greatest mystery of his administration. The economic implications alone are staggering, reported Trade Minister, his gelatinous form pulsing with bioluminescent worry patterns. Earth was beginning to show significant potential as a trading partner. Their agriculture was primitive but effective, and their cultural exports were gaining popularity throughout the Outer Rim territories. Cultural exports? Its energy pattern shifted to indicate confusion. Music primarily. Something called rock and roll had become quite popular among the younger generation of several species. They had even begun incorporating human guitar techniques into their traditional sonic sculptures. The president's form flickered with something that might have been amusement in another context. And now? Gone, all of it. We have some recordings, some artifacts that were off-world when it happened. But the source, the planet itself, the billions of beings who created that culture, vanished without a trace. Doctor, the Federation's foremost expert on dimensional physics, had been unusually quiet during the proceedings. Now she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of terrible possibility. There is one theory we haven't considered. All attention turned to the diminutive scientist. Her people were known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds, and their ability to perceive patterns that others missed. "What if they didn't vanish?" she said slowly. "What if they left?" The silence that followed was deafening. "Impossible," Trade Minister sputtered. "They were barely capable of interplanetary travel. They had no technology for dimensional manipulation, no understanding of." "No understanding that we were aware of," Doctor corrected. "Remember, they were a fractured species. What if one faction had been working in secret? What if they had made discoveries they chose not to share with the galactic community?" President's energy matrix pulsed with consideration. "You're suggesting they had some form of advanced technology hidden from us?" "I'm suggesting we may have underestimated them, badly." On the research station orbiting what had once been Earth's moon, now hanging alone in the void, Doctor was conducting his own investigation. The cetacean researcher had been one of the few galactic citizens who had actually spent time on Earth, studying the curious fact that humans had shared their world with other intelligent species, something almost unheard of in galactic history. The dolphins and whales of Earth had been another mystery. Intelligent, yes, but seemingly content to live in harmony with the dominant humans rather than competing for control of the planet. Doctor had been in the middle of a long-term study of these unusual relationships when Earth simply disappeared. Now he floated in his specialized tank aboard the research station, reviewing data that made no sense. His assistant, a young named Pip, brought him the latest readings from the lunar monitoring stations. "Doctor, you need to see this. The gravitational readings from Luna are all wrong." Dr. Sung's speech warbled with interest. "Wrong how?" "The moon should have been thrown out of orbit the moment Earth disappeared. Without the planet's gravitational anchor, Luna should have gone flying off into space. But look at these readings." The doctor studied the data with growing amazement. Luna was maintaining its original orbit, as if Earth was still there. Not only maintaining it, but showing gravitational readings that suggested Earth's mass was still present, still affecting the local space-time continuum. "This is impossible," Doctor sang. "Either Earth is still here but invisible to all our instruments, or..." "Or what, doctors?" "Or someone has left a gravitational anchor in place to maintain the system's stability. Someone who understood the implications of removing a planet from an established orbital system." Pip's scales rippled with confusion. But who would have that kind of technology? And why would they care about maintaining the stability of a solar system after removing its inhabited planet? Doctor was quiet for a long moment, his song speech reduced to thoughtful humming. "Perhaps," he finally said, "because they plan to come back." The implications of his words hung in the water of his tank, like a depth charge waiting to explode. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. The disappearance of Earth had become the greatest mystery of the age, spawning countless theories and investigations. Some believed the humans had been harvested by an unknown alien force. Others suggested they had been the victims of some cosmic catastrophe that their instruments couldn't detect. A few whispered that perhaps the humans had been more advanced than they had let on and had simply decided to leave. But as the months passed and no trace of Earth or its inhabitants was found, most of the galaxy began to forget. Humans became a curiosity, a footnote in galactic history. Their brief time in the galactic community was remembered fondly by some, dismissed as insignificant by others. The universe was vast, and there were always new crises, new discoveries, new species to encounter. Life went on. 5 years after Earth's disappearance, the galactic community had largely moved on. The Sol system was occasionally visited by researchers and thrill-seekers, but most had lost interest in the mystery. The prevailing theory was that the humans had been victims of some unknown cosmic phenomenon, possibly related to their sun's solar wind patterns or some previously undetected dimensional instability in their local space. Commander, now promoted to Admiral, was one of the few who continued to visit the empty system regularly. Something about the humans' disappearance continued to gnaw at him. Perhaps it was the way they had refused to accept limitations, their stubborn insistence that impossible was just another word for challenge. In his long career, he had met many species, but few had impressed him the way the humans had with their raw determination. Standing once again on the observation deck of his flagship, now renamed the Terran Memorial, he watched as his science teams conducted their routine scans of the empty space. They had found nothing new in years, but he insisted they continue. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice kept insisting that the humans weren't gone. Not really. Sir, his current science officer, a named, approached with the familiar resignation of someone delivering routine negative results. Scans are complete. No changes from last time. Any word from the deep space monitoring stations? Nothing, sir. No signals, no energy signatures, no evidence of human activity anywhere in the galaxy. Admiral nodded, but his attention was drawn to something outside the viewport. For just a moment, he thought he saw something shimmer in the empty space where Earth should have been. A ripple in space-time, perhaps, or just a trick of his aging optical organs. Run a quantum fluctuation scan on coordinates 152.7 by 89.3. Sir, there's nothing there but empty space. Humor me. As the science officer initiated the scan, continued to stare at the empty coordinates. The humans had a saying that had always amused him. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. It occurred to him now that perhaps the galaxy should have taken that advice more seriously. Perhaps they should have prepared for the humans to come back. The quantum scan results appeared showing the familiar emptiness of vacuum. But there, buried deep in the quantum foam, was the faintest trace of something that shouldn't be there. A pattern in the chaos, a structure that suggested intelligent design. Sir, said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. I'm reading some unusual quantum signatures. It's probably just instrument error, but... But what? But if I didn't know better, I'd say something is building a massive quantum infrastructure in this location. Something hidden in the spaces between dimensions. Admiral felt his blood turn cold, or hot. With his species, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. How massive. His instrument readings caused his natural coloration to shift toward the deep purple that indicated extreme concern. Sir, if these readings are accurate, whatever is being built here is larger than anything in recorded galactic history. We're talking about a construct that would dwarf entire star systems. The Admiral turned away from the viewport, his mind racing. Send an encrypted message to Galactic Command. Priority Alpha 7. Tell them we may have found something. What should I tell them we found, sir? Was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible certainty. Tell them we found evidence that the humans aren't gone. Tell them they're building something. And tell them we probably should have been paying closer attention to what they were capable of. As the message burst toward the galactic core at faster-than-light speeds, Admiral continued to stare at the empty space where Earth had been. Somewhere in the quantum foam, in the spaces between reality, something vast and incomprehensible was taking shape. Something that carried the unmistakable signature of human determination. The galaxy was about to learn that impossible was indeed just another word for challenge. And humanity was about to demonstrate exactly what they had been building for the past 5 years, in their self-imposed exile from reality. Admiral's urgent message reached Galactic Command just as the hegemony was dealing with its own crisis. The Expansion, a militant faction from the galaxy's outer rim, had been pushing into civilized space with alarming aggression. Their technology was formidable, their tactics ruthless, and their apparent goal was nothing less than galactic domination. General, Supreme Military Coordinator for the hegemony, studied the Admiral's report with growing unease. They were already stretching their defenses thin, and now they had evidence of some unknown construction project in the Sol system. The timing felt ominous. "Get me a direct line to Admiral," she commanded her aide. The holographic communication activated within moments, showing the Admiral's concerned features from light years away. "Admiral, your report mentions quantum signatures consistent with massive construction. How certain are you of these readings?" Its image flickered slightly as the transmission adjusted for distance. "General, I've been monitoring this system for 5 years. These readings are unlike anything we've detected before. Whatever is being built here exists partially outside our dimensional space, which explains why we couldn't detect it until now." "Could it be technology?" "Negative. The quantum signatures are completely different from anything in our databases. This is something new, something that operates on principles we don't understand." General felt her secondary hearts begin to race. "Admiral, I'm dispatching a full investigation fleet to your position. In the meantime, maintain your distance and continue monitoring. If your suspicions are correct about human involvement, we need to be prepared for anything. 3 days later, a fleet of 50 ships arrived in the Sol system. Scientists, military analysts, and from a dozen species worked around the clock to understand what they were seeing. The quantum signatures were growing stronger, and advanced sensors were beginning to detect massive structures hidden in the spaces between dimensions. Doctor, the dimensional physicist who had first suggested the humans might have left voluntarily, arrived aboard the research vessel Infinite Inquiry. Her analysis of the quantum data confirmed everyone's worst fears. "They're not just building something," she announced to the assembled scientists and military officers. "They're building everything. What we're seeing here appears to be the construction of an entire pocket dimension, complete with its own physical laws and space-time structure." Captain of the Hegemony Navy leaned forward in his command chair. "Explain that in terms a soldier can understand, Doctor." "Imagine taking an entire solar system and wrapping it in a bubble of altered reality. The humans appear to have done exactly that, then spent 5 years building something inside that bubble. We're only now detecting it because they're preparing to bring it back into normal space." "Bring what back?" Doctor's data showed complex mathematical structures that easy explanation. Based on these readings, they've built what can only be described as a fortress. Not just a space station or a planetary defense grid, but something that exists on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. If they activate it fully, it would be effectively invulnerable to any weapon we possess. The implications hit the assembled officers like a plasma charge. Captain's voice was carefully controlled when he spoke. "Doctor, are you telling me that the humans disappeared 5 years ago so they could build?" "Not exactly." Doctor pulled up additional data streams. "The energy signatures suggest something far more complex than a weapon. It's more like they've built an entire civilization that exists partially outside normal spacetime. A civilization that has spent 5 years advancing technologically without any external interference." Admiral, listening from his own ship, felt pieces clicking into place. "Doctor, you mentioned they could bring this construct back into normal space. Any idea when?" "Based on the increasing quantum resonance, I'd estimate less than 72 hours. The fleet immediately went a high alert. Emergency communications were sent to every corner of the galaxy. The expansion, which had been pressing their advance on 3 fronts, suddenly seemed like a secondary concern. On the bridge of the flagship Galactic Harmony, General coordinated the largest military mobilization in galactic history. Representatives from every major power were demanding answers, and she had none to give. The humans had been considered a minor species, barely worth noticing. Now they were possibly about to emerge as the most powerful force the galaxy had ever seen. "Status report," she demanded. 700 ships have responded to our emergency call," her tactical officer reported. "Everything from hegemony dreadnoughts to bioships. It's the largest fleet ever assembled. And their advance has completely stopped. They're pulling back to defensive positions. Apparently, they're as concerned about this development as we are." General almost smiled at that. It took something truly terrifying to make the retreat. 60 hours later, the quantum signatures in the Sol system reached critical intensity. Every sensor in the massive fleet was focused on the coordinates where Earth should have been. Scientists held their breath, military officers checked their weapon systems, and diplomats prepared for first contact protocols. Then reality rippled. Space-time bent and twisted like fabric in a cosmic wind. The dimensional barriers that had hidden the human construct began to dissolve, revealing something that comprehension. It wasn't just Earth that reappeared, it was Earth transformed. The planet itself was encased in a crystalline shell that pulsed with its own inner light. Massive structures extended from the shell like the arms of some cosmic sea creature, each one easily the size of a moon. Energy conduits crackled between the structures, carrying power that registered on sensors as being equivalent to the output of a small star. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Surrounding Earth was a complete fleet of vessels unlike anything in galactic history. Ships that seemed to be grown rather than built, their hull materials shifting and adapting as the watching fleet observed them. Some ships appeared to be partially phased out of normal space, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Others seemed to be pure energy contained within force fields that bent light around them. The largest of these vessels was truly staggering. Nearly the size of a small moon itself, it hung motionless above the crystalline shell that protected Earth. Its hull was covered with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if the human eye wasn't meant to process their complexity. "Count," General whispered. "Over 10,000 ships, ma'am, possibly more. Some of them are registering on sensors inconsistently, as if they're not entirely in our dimension. Power signatures? Unknown. Our instruments can't get accurate readings. Whatever they're using for power, it's beyond our current understanding of physics." As the fleet watched in stunned silence, the largest human vessel began to move toward them. It approached slowly, deliberately, giving everyone time to register its impossible size and the casual way it seemed to bend space around itself. A communication request appeared on every ship's console simultaneously. General looked around her bridge. Every face reflected the same mixture of awe and terror she felt. "Open the channel," she ordered. The flickered, then cleared to show a human face. But this wasn't the same species they remembered from 5 years ago. The being looking back at them appeared to be human, but enhanced. His eyes held depths that suggested vast intelligence, and when he spoke, his words carried harmonics that resonated on multiple frequencies. "Greetings, galactic community," the human said, his voice carrying a warmth that was somehow more unsettling than any threat would have been. "I am commander of the Terran Federation. We apologize for our extended absence, but we had some important work to complete." General found her voice. "Commander, I am General of the Galactic Hegemony. We need to understand what has happened here. Your planet disappeared 5 years ago." "Yes," replied simply. "We stepped outside of normal space-time to give ourselves room to grow. We had reached the limits of what we could achieve while constrained by the current galactic paradigm." "What exactly have you built here?" Doctor interjected, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. Commander's expression grew thoughtful. "Doctor, we've built what you might call a new way of existing. Over the past 5 years, we've advanced our understanding of physics, biology, consciousness, and reality itself. We've learned to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, to manipulate space-time directly, and to transcend the limitations that once bound us." Captain leaned forward. "Commander, your capabilities appear to far exceed anything in galactic civilization. What are your intentions?" Smile was genuinely warm, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Our intentions are the same as they always were, Captain. We want to explore, to learn, to grow. We want to push the boundaries of what's possible and refuse to accept that anything is truly impossible." "And the rest of the galaxy?" "We have no desire to conquer or dominate, but we've been monitoring galactic affairs during our absence. The expansion has been causing considerable suffering. We thought perhaps it was time to become more actively involved in galactic affairs." As if summoned by his words, new contacts appeared on the fleet's sensors. Warships, hundreds of them, had just jumped into the system. Their arrival formation was clearly aggressive, weapons already charging. The fleet was impressive by any normal standard. Their ships were sleek, powerful, and armed with weapons that had been carving through galactic defenses for months. They had come expecting to find a vulnerable research fleet investigating some ancient mystery. Instead, they found themselves facing not only the largest galactic fleet ever assembled, but also the transformed might of humanity. Commander's expression didn't change, but something in the air around his ship seemed to shift. "I'm afraid we have uninvited guests," he said calmly. The fleet leader, a being known for his tactical brilliance and utter ruthlessness, opened a communication channel. His four-armed form filled the screen, cybernetic enhancements gleaming in the harsh lighting of his bridge. "Unknown vessels, you are trespassing in territory. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick." Turned his attention to the commander with the same calm demeanor he'd shown everyone else. "Commander, or, I presume, your reputation precedes you. Unfortunately, this system is not territory, and we must respectfully decline your generous offer." "You know my name?" Or's augmented voice carried surprise and anger in equal measure. "We've been monitoring galactic affairs, as I mentioned. Your expansion has been noted. We feel it's time someone addressed your rather aggressive approach to relations." The commander's laugh was a harsh, mechanical sound. "You dare threaten me with what appears to be a motley collection of museum pieces. My fleet will scatter your ships like. He never finished the sentence. Commander gestured almost casually, and space around the fleet simply changed. The fundamental forces that held their ships together began to alter. Gravity reversed itself in pockets around their vessels. The electromagnetic fields that powered their weapons started flowing backward. The nuclear fusion that drove their engines began to operate in reverse. Within seconds, the most feared fleet in galactic space found itself completely helpless. Their ships hung motionless, every system either shut down or operating in ways that physics. As I was saying, continued conversationally, we have no desire for conquest, but we won't tolerate bullying on this scale. Commander, or you and your forces will return to your home territory and remain there. Any further aggressive expansion will be met with our direct intervention. The watching galactic fleet was stunned into silence. Hundreds of warships, vessels that had been terrorizing the galaxy for months, had been rendered helpless without a shot being fired. The humans had demonstrated power that transcended every known law of physics. General realized she was witnessing the emergence of a new galactic superpower. No, not just a superpower. Humanity had apparently transcended the very concept of power as the galaxy understood it. Commander, she said carefully, what exactly are you capable of? His expression grew thoughtful. General, we've learned that reality is far more flexible than most species realize. We've discovered how to exist in multiple dimensions, how to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe, and how to transcend the normal limitations of matter and energy. In essence, we've learned to rewrite the rules of existence itself. All of humanity, every human who chose to make the journey with us, yes, we offered everyone the option to undergo the transformation. Most accepted. Those who didn't were relocated to colonies that remained in normal space. Doctor was furiously taking notes. Commander, the implications of what you're describing. You've essentially evolved beyond physical existence as we understand it. In some ways, yes, but we haven't lost our essential humanity. We still value the same things we always did: freedom, exploration, the refusal to accept limitations. We've just gained the ability to act on those values on a cosmic scale. The fleet, still helpless in their transformed space, served as a stark reminder of what that cosmic scale meant. As the initial shock wore off, the assembled galactic fleet began to grasp the true magnitude of what had occurred. Humanity hadn't just returned from a 5-year absence. They had returned as something new, something that made every other species in the galaxy seem primitive by comparison. And they were just getting started. The aftermath of humanity's return sent shockwaves through every corner of galactic civilization. Within hours of the fleet's humiliating defeat, emergency sessions were called on every major world. The humans had not only returned, but they had evolved into something that challenged every assumption about the limits of biological and technological development. On the hegemony capital world of Prime, the Grand Assembly convened in emergency session. Representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered to discuss the implications of humanity's transformation. The debate was heated, fearful, and ultimately futile. How do you legislate against beings who can rewrite the laws of physics? Chancellor, a being whose species had guided galactic politics for over 50,000 years, found herself facing a crisis that all precedent. The question before us, she addressed the assembly, is not whether humanity poses a threat. They have demonstrated capabilities that render traditional concepts of threat meaningless. The question is how we coexist with beings who have transcended the normal limitations of existence. Representative from the Outer Rim territories raised a point that had been troubling many minds. Chancellor, we've seen what they can do to the. What's to stop them from simply taking over the galaxy? Chancellor activated the holographic display that showed recent intelligence reports. All evidence suggests they have no interest in conquest. Commander's actions indicate they're more concerned with preventing suffering and promoting exploration than with accumulating power. But can we trust them? The question came from Ambassador of the Confederacy. They've hidden this transformation from us for 5 years. They've demonstrated the ability to neutralize our most powerful military forces without effort. How do we maintain any kind of galactic order when one species has become essentially godlike? The question hung in the air like an unexploded quantum charge. Around the galaxy, similar debates raged. Some species called for immediate diplomatic outreach to humanity. Others suggested a defensive alliance against the potential human threat. Still others proposed abandoning civilized space entirely rather than risk conflict with beings of such overwhelming capability. But in the Sol system, humanity was addressing problems on a scale that made galactic politics seem quaint. Commanders stood in what had once been the command center of the International Space Station, now transformed into something that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Around him, other transformed humans worked on projects that would have been incomprehensible to their former selves. They were mapping the structure of reality itself, identifying flaws in the fabric of spacetime that threatened the stability of entire galactic clusters. "Status report," requested, and information flowed into his consciousness through channels that transcended normal communication. Director Sarah Martinez, once a NASA engineer and now something far more complex, provided an update that would have terrified the watching galactic fleet. "We've completed the initial stabilization protocols. The dimensional rifts in the clouds have been sealed, and we've corrected the quantum fluctuations that were threatening to collapse the Andromeda approach vectors." Nodded, processing information on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. "What about the home system?" "Interesting development there. After our demonstration, their entire civilization appears to be undergoing a philosophical revolution. They're abandoning their expansion plans and focusing on internal development. Some of their leaders are requesting information about our transformation process." "And the other species?" Dr. James, who had once been humanity's leading expert on xenobiology and was now something that transcended such simple classifications, materialized beside them. His form shifted between multiple dimensional states as he spoke. "Fear, mostly. They're trying to understand what we've become and whether they can achieve something similar." Considered this. It had been expected, really. Humanity's transformation represented a fundamental challenge to every assumption about biological and technological limitations. Every species would now have to confront the question of whether they, too, could transcend their current existence. "James, what's your assessment? Could other species follow our path?" "Some could with extensive guidance and preparation. Others are too locked into their current evolutionary patterns. A few," he paused, considering complex multidimensional calculations. "A few might actually surpass what we've achieved, given their unique biological and cultural foundations." This was the conversation the galactic fleet would have given anything to overhear. Humanity hadn't just evolved beyond their former limitations. They were actively considering how to help other species do the same. Meanwhile, in the crystal-shielded depths of Earth itself, even more profound changes were taking place. The planet's surface was no longer recognizable. Where once there had been cities and wilderness, there were now structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Forests of crystalline trees that grew through higher dimensional space, their roots extending into realities that had no names in any galactic language. Human consciousness itself had been transformed. Individuals could exist in multiple states simultaneously, experiencing reality from perspectives that incorporated dimensions of existence previously unknown. They had become living bridges between different levels of reality, able to perceive and manipulate the fundamental forces that shaped the universe. But perhaps most remarkably, they had retained their essential humanity. The same curiosity that had driven them to explore space, the same refusal to accept limitations that had made them notorious throughout galactic civilization, the same protective instincts that had led them to defend weaker species. All of this remained, but amplified to cosmic proportions. Doctor, once a quantum physicist, and now a being who existed partially as living mathematical equations, was working on what she called the Great Project. It was an undertaking that dwarfed even humanity's transformation, nothing less than the reconstruction of reality itself, to eliminate suffering on a galactic scale. "The calculations are complete," she announced to the collective consciousness that had once been the United Nations Security Council. "We can do it. We can rewrite the fundamental laws of physics to eliminate the conditions that create conflict and suffering." The response was immediate and unanimous: no. His voice carried the weight of transformed humanity's collective wisdom. "We've discussed this. We won't impose our will on the universe, no matter how benevolent our intentions. Free will, including the freedom to make mistakes and suffer the consequences, is too precious to sacrifice for perfect order." But we could end war, end hunger, end death itself. At the cost of ending choice. We've become powerful beyond imagination, but power without wisdom is just another form of destruction. We'll help where we can, guide where we're asked, but we won't become the universe's dictators, even benevolent ones. This conversation represented the soul of what humanity had become. They possessed the power to remake reality itself, to impose any vision of perfection they chose, but they consciously chose restraint. It was perhaps the most human thing about them. Back in galactic space, the implications of humanity's return were becoming clear. The expansion had completely collapsed, not through military defeat, but through the simple demonstration that their approach to power was primitive and pointless. Why conquer territories when beings existed who could rewrite the laws that governed territories? But humanity's influence was spreading in more subtle ways. The mere knowledge that such transformation was possible had triggered a renaissance of scientific and philosophical inquiry throughout the galaxy. Species that had considered themselves at the peak of development suddenly realized they had barely begun to explore the possibilities of existence. Though with their mastery of biotechnology, began experimenting with consciousness expansion techniques inspired by humanity's transformation. The natural mathematicians started developing new forms of mathematics that incorporated multidimensional logic. Even the ancient and conservative Celestials began questioning whether their millions of years of cultural stability might have been an evolutionary dead end. Admiral, still maintaining his vigil in the Sol system, found himself serving as an unofficial ambassador between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Daily, he received requests from species wanting to understand how humanity had achieved their transformation, whether similar evolution was possible for others, and what humanity's long-term plans might be. Admiral, his communication officer announced, we're receiving a priority transmission from the High Council. They're requesting direct communication with Commander regarding what they're calling evolutionary consultation. Nodded, it was the 15th such request that day. Word of humanity's transformation was spreading, and every advanced species was beginning to wonder if they, too, could transcend their current limitations. Patch them through to the human communication relay, he ordered. Minutes later, his familiar voice filled the bridge. Admiral, I understand they have questions about our development process. That's correct, Commander. They're specifically interested in whether their sonic-based consciousness could be adapted for multi-dimensional existence. Was quiet for a moment, and could sense the vast calculations taking place behind that pause. It's possible, Admiral. In fact, their natural affinity for harmonic frequencies might give them advantages in certain dimensional transitions that we lack. We'd be happy to provide guidance if they're serious about pursuing transformation. This was the pattern emerging across the galaxy. Humanity wasn't hoarding their knowledge or using their power to dominate. Instead, they were actively helping other species explore their own potential for transcendence. It was, reflected, perhaps the most human response possible to godlike power. But transformation on such a scale couldn't happen without consequences. As more species began attempting their own evolutionary leaps, the fabric of galactic civilization began to shift in fundamental ways. Trade relationships that had existed became irrelevant when some species could simply manipulate matter directly. Military alliances meant nothing when potential conflicts involved beings who could rewrite physics. The Galactic Council found itself facing the need to completely its role. How do you govern a galaxy where different species exist on completely different levels of reality? How do you maintain order when some civilizations can manipulate the fundamental forces of existence? Commander addressed these concerns in a communication to the entire galactic community 6 months after humanity's return. His image appeared on every screen capable of receiving it, his voice translated into every known language. Fellow beings of the galaxy, he began, we understand the uncertainty our return has created. We want to assure you that our transformation doesn't threaten your way of life. We have no desire to rule, to conquer, or to impose our vision on others. We seek only what we have always sought, the freedom to explore, to grow, and to help others do the same. But we also recognize that our capabilities create new responsibilities. We have begun establishing what we call guardian protocols, systems to prevent the abuse of transcendent technologies, and to provide assistance to species seeking their own evolutionary advancement. The universe is vast enough for all paths of development. Some species will choose technological advancement. Others will pursue biological evolution. Still others will explore consciousness expansion or dimensional transcendence. We welcome all paths and offer our assistance to any who request it. What we will not tolerate is the use of any advanced capabilities to oppress or destroy others. They learned this lesson peacefully. Others may not be so fortunate if they choose aggression. It was a declaration that established humanity as the galaxy's unofficial guardians, not through conquest, but through demonstrated power and declared intent. They had become the force that ensured no single species could dominate others, while simultaneously offering a path to advancement for any who sought it. The transformation of galactic civilization accelerated. Within a year of humanity's return, 17 different species had begun their own evolutionary projects. 3 had achieved limited success, developing capabilities that approached what humanity had accomplished. The others were making steady progress, guided by human advisors who seemed genuinely interested in helping them surpass human achievements. The galaxy was entering a new age, an age where the old limitations of biology, technology, and physics were becoming mere suggestions rather than absolute laws. It was an age of unlimited possibility, guided by a species that had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true power lay not in the ability to impose your will, but in the wisdom to know when not to use that ability. Earth hung in space, transformed and transcendent, a beacon of what was possible when a species refused to accept the word impossible. Around it, the galaxy was slowly learning to dream beyond its former limitations, guided by beings who had once been dismissed as primitive, but had proven that evolution was limited only by imagination and will. The age of human ascendancy had begun, but it was an ascendancy defined not by domination, but by liberation, the liberation of every species to become whatever they had the courage to dream themselves capable of becoming. In the end, humanity's greatest achievement wasn't their transcendence of physical limitations or their mastery of multidimensional existence. It was their demonstration that true advancement came not from power over others, but from the wisdom to use that power in service of universal growth and freedom. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps, for the first time in its long history, it had finally begun to live up to its true potential.